Hey everyone, welcome back to my channel. Today we have a very special guest, Avi Abrams. Now, I met Avi about 10 years ago when he was just starting off his career, and he reached out to me randomly on LinkedIn or email, I forget what it was, and he wanted to get a job in venture capital. And for whatever reason, I don't quite remember what, but I was impressed with what he said and what he told me. We hired him as an intern, and then he went off to start his very successful career in venture capital and private equity, eventually got a job at a high growth startup and became an executive there, and then eventually went off to start his own business. So I think this is going to be a very interesting conversation if you want to learn more about how to go from basically unemployed to getting a job in venture capital, which is very hard to get, and then getting into a high growth startup and working your way up that career ladder and then starting your own business. So, Avi, great to have you. Nice to see you.
Great to be here. That was very well said.
Yeah, I know. So let's start off. Tell people about your background, your career, whatever you want to say.
So, yeah, I mean, I go back to probably the day that I wanted to work in venture capital. Probably being a middle child, anything with disruption in it, anything which kind of changed the way every day sort of worked. And don't forget, that was the time of Ubers and Facebooks and all those things. And so that just got me excited. And so I after university, I really wanted to work in venture capital. I think I must have reached out to every single firm on the planet. And don't forget, it wasn't like a big industry back then. It was
It's like 2015, right?
yeah, like probably around then. And there just wasn't that much around. And so like the advice everyone gave me was like, oh, you got to go to San Francisco. You got to meet somebody there. That's probably where you'll get to it. And I kind of always leaned into networking. I think I somehow through a friend of a friend heard of Matan and probably shot out a cold email or something like that. And I'll never forget. You somehow responded and kind of came in the first day. And I actually very clearly remember this moment, which was we sat down. I should have been nervous, and I don't think I was for some reason. And you asked me,
definitely
I should have been nervous. It was, but I remember just we sat down in an office, and you're like, "Can I get you a drink?" And I said, "Sure, I'll have a scotch." And I think you actually came out and came back with a bottle of something, and we both had a drink. And probably at that point, I was like, "Yeah."
Yeah, we had a file in one of the cabinets called the Scotch file, and there was a bottle of Scotch there for special occasions and people that were too nervous. So
it all worked out.
Yeah. So yeah, that's really good. Was I the only person to respond to your cold emails?
Yeah. No, I was doing a lot of networking. I think at the time, I reached out to just so many different industries because I think it was a big part of me. It was like, what do I actually want to do? Like after university, you're kind of lost. Like the world expects you to just figure it out. What do you want to do? Do you want to be a lawyer? Do you want to be a doctor? Do you want to and so I spent a lot of time just speaking to a lot of different people and kind of, finding my way into venture capital. It all just made sense, and I'm happy we met.
Yeah, it's interesting because I had a policy for a very long time that I keep until today, which is I respond to everybody that reaches out in a sincere way. And I always agree to meet up with someone for advice. And I've kept that going for like 10 years. And sometimes it gets very difficult because, as the more you progress in your career and you have a fancy title, people want your time. So I remember that's the kind of policy I had with you. I'm like, okay, this random guys are reaching out to me. Okay, let me give him 20 minutes, half an hour, whatever it was. And I remember being impressed. Again, I don't remember what it was, but there was something about it. So we gave you a paid internship, not an unpaid internship.
Yeah, it was paid.
Paid internship, which, my goodness, back then in venture capital was probably like the only paid internship in the country. So,
hit the jackpot. It was exciting. I was thrilled.
So that was a great experience. And then you went off to a private equity venture capital firm after that. Tell us what happened after you left that firm.
Yeah. So after the internship ended, I ended up getting a job at a small private equity venture firm. It was a family firm. It was called Yorkville Partners. It was a bit of a similar play to Constellation Software, if anyone's familiar with that. It's a software roll-up of legacy softwares and kind of bring them all together and create value add that way. And I was there for a bit. It was a little, maybe 2 years or so. And at that point, I think in everyone's stage of that career, like they're all just figuring out, how do I move up? How do I go to something more legit? How do I get more exposure to some of the bigger deals going on? How do I buy a Rolex? I think those were like the, you know what I mean? That was like all you thought about at that point. And so I kind of went back to my basics of networking, trying to find people to speak to, trying to figure out where to go. And I went online and started looking for just different networking events. And one of the places that I ended up finding was an event called it was a finance event called the Black Ties. And I just clearly remember taking a trip downtown, walking into the venue, and kind of opening the door, looking back at the sign, and going, "Oh, the black." This was an event for the Black community, and I'm not. I'm a white Jewish guy, and so it was really funny showing up on on that at that event, and I was there. I might as well go, and so I joined the event, and
Were you the only white guy? White
oh
person?
yeah. Everyone clearly knew I was in the wrong place, but they it was really accepting. It was great, and so the panelists spoke, and I ended up connecting with one of the bankers who was a banker at CIBC at the time, and we hit it off. I ended up getting a coffee chat with him, and then things sort of led. He introduced me to his friend, to their friend, to their friend. Finally, I met with someone who was about to make an early seed investment in a company called Humi, which was barely even a company at the time. She knew the CEO, and she said, "Hey, Avi, why don't you go meet with this guy? I'm going to give you some advice." And I said, "All right, what is it?" And she's like, "If you want to actually understand and differentiate yourself in venture capital, you're going to have to do something different." And she's like, I think one of the best ways you could do that is actually get experience, like understand how a startup works, understand how it operates, and find your way in that way. And
Wait a
so,
second, that's pretty mind blowing.
yeah,
In
I
order
know.
to invest in startups, you have to learn how to start.
Understand.
It's pretty
It
good.
was crazy, right? At the time,
Yeah,
that was
especially
yeah.
back then. Like
I
this is,
know.
okay, keep
And
going.
and so yeah, I went with it, and I met this guy, and maybe about an hour into the conversation, somehow a handshake deal went down, and I said, "Okay, I'm going to do it. I'm going to join this company and see where this thing goes," because I was ready to take a shot at doing something cool. And that was kind of the beginning. That was the CEO at the time of Humi. Um, I obviously didn't do my due diligence well enough, so there's probably a reason that I wasn't continuing in the venture capital space, because I showed up day one expecting a 15, 20 person company in an office and some stability, but kind of showed up my first day at a condo, and bunch of out of a scene from like Silicon Valley, like a bunch of guys, like two guys around a table, and just, "Hey man, welcome to Humi." Instantly regretted that decision. Like, oh my God, what did I just do? My career barely started. I just threw it all in the trash. Um, but I stuck with it, and the company went on, got into YC, raised a couple rounds of financing, and it's a great story after that. So
Yeah, I mean, for the people that don't know, well, first tell people what Humi is.
Humi is a Toronto-based company. It's a SaaS software, and so what we do, or they do, is a HR and payroll for small businesses in Canada, help companies operate and utilize their employees better by using these softwares. So
Yeah, I mean, that's interesting because you started at the very beginning of the company. You're one of the first employees, and now the company's raised $50 million or something like that. That's what's publicly available. They've
yeah.
raised like 50 million, and you've been there almost throughout that entire process. So why don't you tell us more about what you did for Humi, how that role changed as the company
Yeah.
grew, what eventually you did for the company. Yeah.
I think it's funny. There's probably a misconception, I think, where I think a lot of my friends at least thought this, where I joined day one, and like what I knew and at least what I thought my skills were I'm an analytical guy, right? I would just start at a startup, open up a bunch of spreadsheets, and somehow make magical numbers, make the business grow. And that was not, it was the furthest thing from the case. I showed up day one, and I knew nothing. I didn't know anything about HR people. I didn't know what they did, what their hopes were, what their dreams were, what's good in the industry, what's bad. And the company had no clients. And so we had to figure out something. And so without really a job description, I picked up a phone and started making calls, and call after call after cold call after cold call, talking to clients, signing clients, bringing them on, learning about what they did. We ended up building an outbound team around me. And so we did a lot of business development in the early days. And I think like that's one of the most important things for understanding your business. Like when you can understand your customer, that just puts you in a massive position to actually do something valuable for them. I know this sounds maybe obvious, but I always go back to the basics. And so after that time, the company started growing, and we ended up acquiring a very small payroll system. And immediately I knew payroll is a massive opportunity, and it's something that's going to need a lot of work to integrate into the regular HR software. And that's when I kind of jumped on that product and started owning that and becoming a director of that product.
So you became the head of product for at least one of their
Yeah,
products
exactly.
for this high growth, I guess, Series B plus company.
Yeah.
How many people did you manage kind of at the peak?
It was a lot. I mean, the company at the peak was about 160 employees or so. On that team, there was probably 40 or so. Like, it was a huge investment. It was one of the reasons why we raised so much money, because payroll's a massive opportunity to go after. So yeah, it's big.
Okay, that's fascinating. How long were you there before you started to take on more like managerial roles? Was it day one because it was such a small company?
No, the people management came at least a good year into it. Um, we had took some time to get some funding. That was part of it. Um, and then from there, once the funding came in, it started growing, quickly, but not insanely fast. So that was obviously my first exposure to managing people. Um, I learned the hard way for sure. I was uh, more of a friend than a manager. And so, with anything, especially a bunch of people pretty young in their careers trying to figure it out, we all had to trial by error, and, we figured it out along the way. But yeah.
What are some of those lessons, managerial lessons?
So it's interesting. Like, one is, it's really important when you're managing people to like very clear expectations. They're not your friends in a way that's like, do you and I'll do me, and that's that. You have to be very clear about what the vision is, what's expected of them. Um, and if you're not, and you just sort of let them run on their own, like, sometimes people will just make decisions that aren't in line with what the company's trying to do, and just doesn't fit. So that was like a big piece of it. And I think the other part as well was like really trying to make sure that um, people were happy with what they did. Like, I think that was an important part. Like, you sometimes would try to, like, as a manager, trying to get someone to do something new. And in your head, you're like, oh, well, this makes total sense. Let's just get them doing X, Y, and Z. But that might not be their skill set. That might be what they like doing. That might be what they're good at. And so it's like trying to figure out. You're constantly making these matches between um, the job that's constantly evolving and the person that's doing it.
Mhm. I think it was Tobias Lutke from Shopify who's like, "This is not a family. You
Right.
guys are at a
Right.
workplace." And there's this trend of like, "Oh, we're like a family in the workplace." It's like, no, it's a workplace. You should be nice and cordial and respectful, but you could be friends, but you're not family,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think that's a very good point. Setting very clear expectations and trying to match the jobs to people's interests and skill sets the best you can. I've had that experience as well, where I tried to get people that work for me to do things that they didn't like and they weren't good at, and it's just frustrating if you keep trying to do that, right?
Yeah.
That's pretty good lessons. So, what was it like being the head of product for a high growth startup? You don't, from my understanding, you don't have a tech background, so you're coming at it from a
No.
different standpoint.
I'm coming at it purely from understanding the customer. And so the way I got to that stage was actually being the customer. And so what I mean by that is, and this is actually interesting, it's an interesting philosophy on building software in general. And this term was coined, I'm going to butcher it, maybe it's Amazon. It was someone, it was called Mechanical Turk. And the idea being that before you invest a lot of time and money and resources to building a software to automate something, do it manually so you can learn what it's like. And so when we first acquired this payroll system, it barely ran payroll. And so we couldn't really sell it. But what we could do is we could kind of use it on our back end to offer a managed service. And so what we did was we kind of went out to a lot of different companies and said, hey, we've got a payroll system, but it's fully managed. It's white glove service. We do it all for you. And it's run by payroll experts, people who've been, know what they're doing. And when a client would agree to it, and they'd be like, all right, that sounds like a great idea. Let's do it. Obviously, they open up the curtain, and here I was smiling like, hey, first day on the job type of thing. And it forced me to learn.
What's your tech stack? It's just a bunch of guys.
It's literally a bunch of people in the background just working. But that forced me to figure it out. Like, when I had to report, I had to like copy information off of PDFs and somehow get it into an Excel spreadsheet and parse information so that it all looked clean, and make calculations manually on spreadsheets and stuff until I got everything organized and started learning, like, wow, people in payroll will waste so much time doing X, Y, and Z. Let's automate that. That makes so much sense to automate. And so it just became to a point where I knew what to build because I was building it for me. And that was the best part of the job. That's why I was the right fit for doing that.
That's such an important lesson. And again, it sounds obvious to a lot of people, especially if you're running a startup and successfully. It sounds obvious, but so many entrepreneurs don't do this well, or don't try to do it, which is just try to build a product that your customers want and
Yeah.
understanding their need. Sometimes a lot of entrepreneurs focus on features, like, oh, if we build a lot of features, we can outcompete, the incumbents or whatever. But what they miss is that core problem being solved. So you happened upon this problem of payroll. Is that really like SMB small businesses didn't have payroll figured out? Like there wasn't a good solution for that? Is that what you were learning?
So there's a couple things. Payroll in itself it's been the same. It's been the same. I mean, the only change to it has been it went into the cloud. So you no longer have, on-premise payroll, you have cloud-based, so you can run it at the office or at home. But besides for that, it's been the same product as it's been for a very, very long time. And so there's a lot of opportunity to automate in that space, and then at some point even innovate in that space because, there's so many things you could do with funds moving. I mean, it's crazy that we have to wait 2 weeks to get paid. You worked for 2 weeks. Your company's basically taking an interest-free loan from you for 2 weeks. And so there's a lot of interesting things that we wanted to do with it down the line. But then the other part of it was really more around just automating it. It's work that shouldn't be spending human hours on. There's so much that can be automated. And so us having the HR product, but then also the payroll product combined allowed us to do so many like automated actions for the users so that they didn't have to spend their time manually putting data on two systems and doing all that. So
Mhm. How involved did you get with raising capital?
in the seed round, not as much. It got more and more as we went to the A and the B. The seed round, and the company evolved also in different ways throughout that point. We went through a CEO change at one point. We went through so many different department changes and scrapping this and moving that. And for some people, it's not for everyone. Like I thrived in that environment. I like it when, the next day you wake up and everything that you've known till that point is completely ripped up and you're starting something new. But some people need the stability. They're like, I can't. All the change is driving me nuts. And so you almost have to be ready to roll with that sort of thing.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. So you eventually left the firm while you were a director of product, right?
Yeah.
That was your title. And again, this company raised a lot of money. Why did you decide to leave? Correct me if I'm wrong, but you left around the time that the Series B closed, right? $25 million or something.
Yeah. So yes.
What was your decision like? Like what
Why?
were the reasons that you left the firm when it seems like it's on this upward trajectory?
So I actually left the company. It was actually about a year after we raised the Series B.
Mm.
The timing though checks out from your side because the PR announcement actually didn't go out till almost a year later.
Yeah, that happens actually quite
And
quite
that,
often.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And so that was, I think, an indication of how things were moving at the company. We raised a lot of money, and man, I think Steve Jobs has this quote or this
You're gonna drop a Steve Jobs quote?
Steve Jobs. I don't know
Oh,
the
this
quote.
is
I'm gonna
good.
butcher the quote, but he mentions something along the lines of, um, "Best managers are the doers, the ones that can't that know that they can do the job best themselves, and so they almost forced to be managed out of necessity because they're the only one that they trust to actually do the job right and get it done versus, hiring senior leadership who, they're great people managers, but they don't want to do anything. And and that becomes difficult.
Middle manager types. Yeah.
And so that's like a very common, thing that happens in companies, especially when you raise a lot of money, you go out and be like, let's hire people with a ton of experience, but they may not always make the best decisions, necessarily for the company. And so there was a lot of that happening and the company was learning. And so there was a bit of delay in sort of how we were going about building our product and making these decisions about moving forward. And at a certain point, and I think in anything, and you kind of just know when it's time to move on. You realize maybe you take a long look in the mirror and go, A, am I the best guy to do this job? And B, do I want to be doing this job right now? Is this really where my heart and soul is good, is happy? And I think that took some soul searching for sure. That was, some introspective times, but ultimately, yeah, I needed to find where I was constantly learning. I was being challenged. And I think at that stage at Humi, it was kind of going to the next from 1 to 2 versus I loved the 0 to 1.
Hmm. How long were you there for?
About 7 years,
Oh, wow.
which
That's
was like, yeah, forever in millennial job tenure. So
yeah. And in startup land, that's
yeah,
like the average 4 startups. You could
yeah,
have started
yeah, yeah.
and failed at 4 startups.
I know,
That amount of time.
totally. But yeah,
Okay. So that sound like a pretty difficult decision to make, especially you had a family by then.
yeah,
You were married by then, right?
yeah,
And this was a job. It was earning money, and you probably had
yeah,
options and
yeah,
all
yeah.
that. So you felt that the management was not. You probably didn't have a alignment with management on strategy. Things were maybe going a bit slower than you'd like. So what happened next?
So it was about, and this is the craziest thing about timing in life. I had my son was born, and maybe that was the switch that really did it. Because I think that sort of changed my perspective on things where, you kind of look at life out a different lens. You're like, wow, I got, a mouth to feed, like this is, things are, this is really important. And so on one end, you're like, yes, I'm very concerned about money, which is a big part about staying where you are, is staying put. But I think another side of it goes like, this is life. And like, you don't get two shots at it. You got to do what you want to do, and you got to do what makes you happy, and do it in a way that, for me, which was important, to be around my kids. Like I kind of was burnt out of the grind. I wanted to figure out a way to do something new, but at the same time, do it and almost do this experiment of like, could I build something successful while, in a way, not really doing anything? And what I
Mhm.
mean by that is delegating. Can I do
At the
something in a way
time,
that's
you told me you
delegating?
just wanted to be a stay-at-home dad, and your
That,
wife.
yeah. Well, that's what I
I'm
mean.
joking.
Exactly. That would be nice. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah,
Um,
that's great. So, what happened?
so I mean, it wasn't a, you know, email that went out that was like, "Hey, I'm resigning." Like, it was much more of a mutual
More yelling?
decision. No,
Oh,
no, 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 no. We were. I still have great relationships with the entire team there.
that's great.
They're so close. They're such close colleagues still. It was really a mutual decision that we sort of came together. We wanted to make sure everything transitioned right. Don't forget, there's like almost a decade of Humi knowledge that was just sort of sitting in my brain that
Wow.
had to get to other people, and so that was a big part of it. So we took some time, made sure that everyone knew what they were doing as I left, had my, said our goodbyes. Um, and then, yeah, I didn't really know. I didn't really know exactly what the next thing was for me. Um, I knew it was going to be entrepreneurial. And so I kind of started off, I think what a lot of entrepreneurs do, which is like trying to think of your next business idea. And that could be everything from like staying up late at night, like putting in your notepad, like, oh, maybe I'll start, drop shipping, this company or something. And you just start thinking of different things. And I felt myself continuously go down the same path of, think of this interesting novel business idea, talk it over with people, build some excitement around it, build some like very baby MVP, and then go out to my first customer and be like, hey, this is so cool. Here's why you should buy it. XYZ. This is really neat. And I try and sell them on it. And they would kind of go, cool, man. I love your enthusiasm. This is great. But, I maybe come back to me in 6 months. Like, it's just not on my list of things to do. And I kept getting into this spot where I'm like, I'm just pitching people on stuff that, like, trying to convince them of a pain maybe that they could be feeling. And here I have a solution. And so that cycle just kept going and going, and it gets frustrating after a while. And at the time, to keep doing all these experiments, I actually ended up getting myself an assistant to help me, whether it be market research or reaching out to different people and just doing all kinds of stuff. And it was funny because the common denominator that kept coming up was, people were more enthralled with my assistant than they were with me. I was like, I just finished a 100 million plus startup. Like, I thought I was big cheese, and people were, all they could talk about was like, oh my gosh, this guy's amazing. Like, where'd you find him? Can he find me someone? And it was like very serendipitous. One day we just sat down and I'm like, hey, like, do you think we could find more people of your caliber, your skill level? Sounds like people are asking for that. And he was like, absolutely, like, no problem. Consider it done. Like, let's do it. And it sort of just started forming that way. And so this kind of experiment of delegating kind of formed into this real organic way of not just me delegating the work of building this business, but now being able to share that with other clients and being able to share that with other people, to help them delegate parts of their business, whether that be operations or support or just different areas that they could be more efficient in.
That's a lot of lessons there. My goodness. No, really. I mean, I remember even you came to me once. I think you had a cereal subscription business, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like you tried a
I
lot of
tried
things.
it all. You
Yeah.
name it.
I
It
like that business, by the way.
was delicious.
It was
Got a lot of cavities from it, but it was great.
delicious business indeed. But there's so many lessons there. The main one I'm taking from that is the idea sometimes just happens to you because it happens upon you. Like you come to it because you're actually speaking with people with the problem and then the light goes off, right? Rather than trying to reverse engineer a solution to a problem you don't know if people have, right? So that's pretty interesting. So what happened? How did you start the business? You just like, okay, let's get the first client. Let's get them in this. It's like an offshoring assistant, right? Like you help
Exactly.
people offshore,
Yeah.
like an EA or
Exactly.
executive assistant or whatever.
Yeah, it didn't really start in a very official capacity. It sort of started as like, yeah, no problem. I'll help you out. Oh, another person. Oh, he told their friend, can you help them? Yeah, sure, no problem. And that was probably the moment I knew something was going right, was because the business would just keep growing from referrals, organic referrals. And at that point, that was like, I don't know, maybe it's corny to say, but like that product market fit little light bulb that was like,
It's a good keyword for the search.
Yeah,
for the algorithm.
Put a little hashtag on that.
I told him to drop that.
And so that was the kicker that, 'cause like with anything, it's never just, you make it sound like it's just a smooth ride and everything just falls into place, but there's always challenges. There's always parts of it that you're still like pushing through it. But like, it was thinking back to those moments when times would get a little bit tricky to go, no, there's something valuable here. Let's just keep going. And that was like the big takeaway and sort of how the business has been evolving ever since.
So where's the business today?
So we're doing well. We've got a team out in the Philippines. Incredible people. I'm such a huge fan of that part of the world. Being someone who also did a lot of people management in North America for Canadian employees, there was something special about the folks out there. There's a level of loyalty and appreciation. You can even call it hard work if you want, but that I think it's not as appreciated as it is here. There's, it's a simpler life out there, and there's a lot that we get spoiled around here. I mean, there's a lot that we say first world problems for a reason. Like there's, we get upset about sometimes the smallest things, and as employees, you'll constantly have conversations with our managers about, something that may not be so important after all. But, and so that was like really special to me to be kind of leading that group and being really involved with it. And so, yeah, we're continuously growing, helping a lot of different businesses. And it's fun. I'm loving it. I'm really loving the ride.
That's pretty amazing, man. So when I hear, okay, you help offshore certain types of recruitment processes, you help them find those employees there. They work hard. I assume the price is much better than finding someone locally. But that kind of market to me sounds very mature. Like there's so many, I get pitched from recruiting firms like 10 times a week, I'm telling you.
Yeah.
So if someone came to me and pitched, hey, I have a business idea to do offshore recruiting firm. And I'd say, my friend, there's like 1,000 people doing that.
Yeah.
So how do you think through what kind of value you bring that may not be common amongst your competitors? I don't use the word competitive advantage, saying what's not common amongst your competitors. And how do you pitch that? Or do you even pitch that?
Yes.
It sounds like you don't even have to, but.
And this was actually a hard pill to swallow when thinking about what business to start, because I think there's also another impulse as you're sort of thinking about what business to go down of it has to be new, it has to be innovative. No one's ever done it before. And I don't think that's necessarily the case. Like you look at so many, even huge companies like Google was like one of a dozen search engines at the time. I mean, Facebook literally copied MySpace. Like there was, you don't have to be the only one or the first invention to actually do something. I think it just goes back to do something that you care about. And if you care about it, you'll do a really good job. And I think that just holds true. Like I think that goes back to everything that goes to the business. And so there's so many parts of it that I lean into to say, this is what we do differently. And that could be stuff as simple as just having great relationships with our clients, like listening, being there as not just a a transactional relationship, because especially in a world where everything's online and everything's a login and we're all just sort of data numbers in places. But like, being able to wish a client happy birthday, or being able to send a gift at the holiday season or something like that, that just kind of creates a level of trust that people just want to do business with you because they feel secure, they feel confident, they feel safe. I think that's a huge part of what we're all about, what we care to do. And then the other part of it is just the quality, the value. Like, it grows so much on referrals. And so we don't recommend anyone that any of us wouldn't say I would hire that person. Like, I would have to say that I'd want to hire that person before I'd recommend it to someone else. And so that's sort of been the driving key in all of it. And I think it goes back to, like, don't overcomplicate it sometimes. You don't have to reinvent the wheel. Just care about what you do a great job. And I think the rest will fall into place.
It's a great point. I mean, many entrepreneurs I come across have this false perspective, this incorrect perspective, I would say, that they have to show that they don't have competitors. Anytime an entrepreneur comes to me and says they don't have any competitors, there's two things going on. Either they don't know what they're talking about, or they're liars.
Very true.
With some very, very rare exceptions. Like if you're doing something like Elon Musk sending rockets into space, his competitors are NASA. Okay. Not real competitors. But basically 99% of businesses out there have competitors, direct competitors, that they need to figure out how to deal with. So it's very refreshing to hear you basically point that out. It's not about being the most innovative or being first to market or anything like that. It's just doing a good job, having high quality service, treating your clients well, executing, right? That stuff really is what makes businesses successful. It sounds simple, but so many people forget that. Are you a billionaire yet?
No.
Not yet. Okay. Yeah. So, but you're going to be
a billionaire in happiness.
That's not a real thing.
That's what not billionaires say.
That's right. That's what poor people say. Yeah. By the way, I think this whole thing of money doesn't lead to happiness. Yeah. That's probably what poor, it's like a psyop from rich people that poor people don't try as hard. Of course, money can only lead to so much happiness, right? But money is a very important tool to live a very comfortable life, to live a life where you can add value to your community and all that fun stuff. Okay, so what would you give to struggling entrepreneurs as advice? People that are either figuring out what's their next steps, or people that aren't finding quite enough success in what they're doing?
Maybe the theme, but go back to basics. And I think that's probably the theme of Humi, of how I've had success there. It's probably the theme of today, and how I recruit. But, I think we get lost. There's just so much. There's so many screens and datas and dashboards and so many like tools to optimize your business. And that's great. A lot of those things could be massively helpful. But all of that doesn't matter unless you have a great product, a customer who loves your product or service, and a great relationship and a great business model. Like, the actual basics of what are you doing? Are you delivering value to someone? Do they actually care? And then this might be crazy to also talk about, but like emotion, like this, is there an emotion element? Do people love what you do? People can't live without it. Like, when you hit those points, that's the stuff that matters. And if you're not hitting those things, and if you're, I want to say, entrepreneur Avi, sort of going around and trying to find your next business, and you're just getting those like, I don't know, it might be time to look inward and go, am I giving value to this person? And if you can't do it with one person, you got to try for the second. And if you can't get to the second, you keep going. But at some point, you have to be able to deliver the most basic part of economics, which is trading value services for money. And I think that's a valuable lesson, even though sometimes it's potentially obvious.
Yeah, I mean, that's a good lesson. Do you have any resources or books or anything you would recommend people to read or listen to as they go on their journey?
So that's the best question of the day. As a father now of two, reading becomes a luxury that I don't always have. But when I did do a lot of reading or even podcasts, the stuff that I've always connected to best, and I would definitely recommend it as much as possible, were biographies. Business books in general are great. And like, I even back at our time at TerraCap, to like try and sharpen up, I would even read textbooks. I was motivated. Um, but I think those things are great, and reading as much about, business and, you know, different models and things like that are helpful. It's harder to retain that stuff. The brain is as old as it is. It can retain stories way better. And so when I go back to, you know, Steve Jobs, the book about Jobs, and like
Walter Isaacson.
Walter Isaacson one,
That's
and
a
I go
good
back
one,
to
yeah.
that, and he's such an interesting character, and the way he had such a vision for what he was doing and a clarity for what he did. And the way he would sell his vision wasn't like, oh, we make iPods or we make MacBooks. It was like, we are the tools to creativity. We are for people who think different, like that sort of thing. That was like inspiring to me. And that was like stuff that I think is just like the most invaluable. It's the stuff that retains in your brain, and you can use that as you're going about whatever you're doing.
That's great. Great message to leave off on. And for anyone interested in Avi's offshoring recruitment services, they're great. I've connected him to a couple of our startups. They've only had good things to say. I'll leave a link down below for Avi's business, and I recommend anyone that's looking for that kind of service to check it out. And Avi, thank you so much for joining us
Thank
today.
you, Matan. This was a lot of fun. I love a good schmooze. This was
Thanks, man.
great. Thank you.